I looked for examples of utopias, and there weren't that many in fiction. And the only one I could find in song was Goldfrapp. Goldfrapp's song Utopia, which is a fantastic song, but even in that she talks about a Nazi baby. She references a Nazi baby and you're going, I'm not sure it's a utopia that I want to live in. You know, I was thinking about utopian music. I mean, the kind of music that I would most closely associate with utopia would be ecstatic music. And for one person that could be Donna Summer doing I Feel Love. For another person it could be a classical piece of music. It could be Brian Eno or Boards of Canada. But it'll be something that stirs your emotions and heightens you and lifts you, and it has an almost transcendental sense to it. An almost definitely a spiritual sense to it. And that is, you know, when I think of utopias, it's much easier for me to get in a utopian mindset if I'm thinking of the music that takes me to that place. The music that cheers me up. The gigs where you feel at one with the universe, because everybody at that gig is feeling what you're feeling at the exact same time. That is the closest to a utopia that I can come up with, much closer than literature or art or anything else. It's something that happens internally and spiritually rather than a real physical thing.
Utopian music is maybe, like you said, it's an experience as opposed to a genre. You know, it's like when we saw Radiohead at Glasgow Green a couple of years ago, you know, when it's a little bit drizzly, everybody's singing along and you've got that feeling of community. That's a utopian feeling for me. But I know if my wife had been there, she would have been having a thoroughly miserable time. So, you know.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a problem, isn't it? Because it's like everything else. One person's literature is another person can't read it. Yeah. Music, you know, the stuff I enjoy or think is spiritually uplifting, other people might think is a noise. You know, Godspeed You Black Emperor, people might think is a noise. Mogwai at their thrashiest. I feel elevated. I feel like I'm actually lifting up from the physical, you know, ground and floating in space, spiritualized, floating in space, all that kind of stuff. But other people would find it unlistenable. It's really interesting. Some jazz can do it for me. Some jazz I find very spiritual. Spiegel im Spiegel, you know, some modern classical music does it. Philip Glass can do it. Yeah, it's, you know, it's the closest I can get to something that's utopian.
It makes me wonder if in the future there'll be like really highly personalized music for the moment, like it can maybe respond to your physiological responses, your heartbeat, your like sweat response in your skin, and the music adapts to you in the moment to kind of like optimize your feeling of ecstasy. It does make me think of in Brave New World they have synthetic artificial music which is for feeling and to stop riots and things like that, and it doesn't really have any meaning, and it's generated synthetically for that purpose, but that could be done in a positive way as well.
But you know, somebody once wrote, I think it was George Steiner, the literary critic, cultural critic, who wrote that, you know, you could work in the death camps during the day and go home at night and listen to Mozart or Beethoven. That music didn't necessarily change you. Art, in a general sense, didn't necessarily change you and make you less of a monster. And you know, most bad people spend 99% of their lives not doing bad things, but the 1% is pretty bad still. So yeah, I mean, music can be spiritually uplifting. On the other hand, if you are a monster, you can listen to music. Well, Hannibal Lecter does it. Hannibal Lecter in the books and the films listens to I think it's Bach piano pieces in between his slaughter. But we would love to think that art, music, they make us civilized and cultured. Yeah, the Nazis were some of the most cultured people in history. You know, that's why they kept stealing people's paintings.
What kind of new crimes do you imagine being part of our future?
Well, technology will change, but people won't change. So we'll tend to get the same kinds of crime, but in different disguises or with different skin. So it will still be the 7 deadly sins, mostly. That's what most crime or all crime is, when you reach down and look at it closely. But, you know, cyber will be a big part of it. Already we're seeing internet crime. We're seeing victimless crime in a way. We're going internet stalking. Is that a crime? Do we need to reclassify it as a crime? If someone puts your face onto someone else's body, is that a crime or should that be a crime? So there's an awful lot that's coming through the pipeline at the moment that our that lawyers and legal representatives and parliaments aren't quite ready for yet. And of course, when it comes, there will be crime fiction discussing it, and that's already happening. You're getting the internet as a big part of crime fiction now, CCTV, DNA, you know, the future is already here as far as writers are concerned.
I don't know if cutting edge is the right term, but like the real edge of our technology is crime novels are quite good for that, because people will incorporate something that's actually quite new and maybe the laws haven't even been sorted out around yet.
Yeah, I mean, crime fiction keeps changing to take on board the fears of its audience. And the fears of the audience just now are things like identity loss through, you know, your identity being stolen on the internet, or people being able to commit crimes against you using the technology in your house to spy on you, to steal from you, whatever, to stalk you. So all of that is now being taken on board, and we've got crime writers who structure their books as though they are true crime podcasts, for example. So crime writers are very quick to adapt to what's around them in terms of the technology and what's on people's minds in terms of things they're afraid of.
I think the emergence of deep fakes and, like you said, putting somebody's face on another body, the law's nowhere near ready to deal with that kind of crime yet, because even 5 years ago it was fairly unimaginable that people would be able to do this at home without the use of a CGI studio. It's terrifying, and it's having a big effect on society and politics. You know, it's bringing us into this kind of post-truth society where you can fake a speech perfectly from a political figure and you wouldn't know it was fake.
Yeah, I mean, the big issue is fake news, fake this, fake that. Now, of course, fiction, as the word suggests, is fake. It's not the truth, but it's a way of trying to get at the truth using fiction, using fake news, fake information, a fake world, to create something that seems real, seems viable, and tells an essential truth. And crime writers always have looked at why society gets the kinds of crimes that it gets. Now, in a utopian society, would there be crime? Possibly not. Would crime be outlawed? Probably yes. Would there still be crime fiction? I think so. Because it's one thing to stop people doing something, it's something else to stop them thinking it. And I mean, we've already had fiction that's dealt with thought crimes. And we almost see it now on the internet. You get a mob up very quickly for something somebody is supposed to have said, but it's been taken out of context or misreported, and you get this fake truth that then becomes a means of punishing them. So yeah, all of that is coming along, and I think it's a very interesting time to be a writer of any kind of fiction, but also to be a reader.
That actually brings on to one of the questions we were going to ask about. So if say we attain some kind of utopian society, whatever that may look like, you know, generally considered to be a perfect world, do you think that people would still crave crime fiction in a released kind of way to explore these sort of forbidden tendencies even more than they do now? I
mean, it's hard to say what a utopia would look like. People have had a very hard time imagining it in literature down the centuries. And whenever someone has come up with a utopia, very quickly it has been turned on its head and turned into a dystopia. And one person's utopia is another person's dystopia. And I think if you've got utopia, if you've got everybody exactly the same, everybody behaving the same, nobody allowed to misbehave, no litter, no rule breaking, no drunkenness, no this, no that, it's going to be even more exciting to break those rules. And human nature, being an imperfect thing, I think rejects and reacts against the very notion of utopianism. The one time I've seen it done really well in fiction recently would be Ian Banksy's science fiction novels about the culture. And the culture was an attempt at a utopian society, but they still had their enemies and they still had their problems and their issues. And so yeah, I think it's very hard. It's very easy for a fiction writer to imagine a dystopia. It's very easy. And the villains often get the best lines, and they always have done. They've always been much more interesting to the reader in history. Whether it's Satan in Paradise Lost, or whether it's Hannibal Lecter, we find them much more interesting, you know. I mean, hell is a much more interesting place to write about than heaven. You know, when Dante goes from the Inferno and goes up to heaven, it gets very boring indeed. Satan in Paradise Lost and all the devils are much more interesting than anything the angels are up to. And that's always been the way of it. goodness in a way is a wee bit bland and a wee bit samey and a wee bit milky, and we like it a bit darker. We like that edge, and so yeah, give me a dystopia any day.
It's like people say, heaven for climate, hell for company. It's always going to be more interesting, although don't deal with the heat very well.
Do you enjoy spending time in like your antagonist's mind when you're writing them? Do you think that's more fun if you have a character that has those kind of more rebellious tendencies?
Yeah, I mean, there are people who've written good cops, and they are good cops. They obey the rules, they go home at night to their partner, they have a meal, they watch TV, they go to bed, they never break the rules. It can be done, but it's not hugely interesting. You've got to work very hard at making them into interesting characters. If your cop is a maverick, in other words, if the potential is there for them to suddenly go over to the dark side, that makes her a much more interesting character, a much more complex character. I mean, Rebus, when I invented him, started out a very dark character indeed. He's actually lightened up a bit as mortality has caught up with him and he's got older, and he's no longer a cop, he's now retired. But in the early days, he was a very dark, brooding character, full of inconsistencies, a rule breaker, a maverick, the sort of guy the complaints and conduct department of the police would be investigating, because he never obeyed the rules all the time. It made them fascinating to me and much more interesting and exciting to write about. And then the gangsters that I invented were interesting people, the killers were interesting people, because you're going, why are they doing it? What is it about the world that they inhabit that makes them do these terrible things? What makes human beings do terrible things? Is it something in the nature of the human being, or is it something in the nature of the societies we have created? And I think it's partly why it's very hard to imagine a utopia.
Salt, take one.
In Westwind, there is surveillance with satellites. What impact do you think near total satellite coverage over society will affect society, and will it be positive or negative overall?
I mean, we are living in a surveillance society, and we've sleepwalked into it. In a way, every day that we go online, we give away so much information about ourselves without realizing we're doing it. As soon as you click on the box that says accept all cookies, people are going to be hoovering up information about you, what sites you visit, what things you might be interested in buying. They're going to target you for advertising and everything else. And they could end up targeting you for anything. The government could end up targeting you for anything. So you've got to be, it's not that you've got to be careful. I don't think people can be careful. You can't really stop it happening. It's in your home. We have allowed this technology into our home, which is watching our every move. My son, who's in his 20s, has a piece of elastoplast over the camera on his laptop computer. A friend of mine who's in forensics told me not to buy a computer or a phone that required your fingerprint to access it, because then your fingerprint is somewhere online and can be stolen. It's just, we open ourselves up to this, and it's meat and drink to the crime writer, of course. Crime writers can use any and all of this. CCTV is being used all the time. All these things are being used to catch criminals, but all these things can also capture the innocent, which is problematic. So you're walking past someone's house and they've got one of these newfangled doorbells that have a camera. They're watching you as you walk past. They're capturing you as you walk past without you knowing it. And I think it's slightly worrying that this surveillance society, it's unquestioning. We haven't had a chance to question our masters as to whether we want it or not. And I think at the time when I wrote Westwind, which is 1989-90, London had more CCTV at that time than the whole of the United States of America. And I don't think that situation has changed so much. I think the US has got more CCTV than it had, but the UK is still very highly watched. We are very watched. And of course for the crime writer, you then go, well, I've got to get past that somehow. My villain's got to be able to do their thing without being caught on CCTV. They've got to be able to do their thing without it ending up on their mobile phone, or being able to use mobile phone tracking to actually do a GPS and find out where they were on any particular night or any particular minute. So all of this stuff makes it more difficult to be a crime writer than it used to be. So roll on utopia when we don't have any crime and we don't have to worry about this kind of stuff. You can't have a utopia. You just cannot have a utopia. I just cannot imagine it existing. And in fact, when Utopia, Thomas More's book, came out, a couple of 300 years later, a guy came along with a response to it called Erewhon, which is an anagram of nowhere, because he was kind of saying it just can't exist. It's a fantasy. Because human beings are flawed animals. We are not gods, and we are not angels. So there cannot be a time when we will have a utopia. There cannot be a time when human nature will have changed out of all recognition and we'll all be law-abiding goody two-shoes who all feel the same as everybody else. You can't have a utopia unless everybody feels exactly the same as everybody else, because difference has to be washed away. You can't have differences. So no. So good luck with your project, and I'll go back to thinking and writing about dystopias, which is where we live. Hell is other people, as we know. And that's what I write about. Hell is other people.
If there's one thing you could change in society to make things better, is there anything that springs to mind that you would immediately change?
Tough. I mean, there's a lot of small things. Fake news I would try and do away with. Make people less able to put fake news out there in whatever form it comes, whether it's newspapers, the internet, or just lying to your teeth. Let's have some truth. Let's have truth in politics, truth in society. It's kind of tough, little things make a big difference. If you can do a little thing like picking up one piece of litter a day can make a difference. Organising your neighbours into a community that do things together, because we are drifting apart. We are being isolated and atomised, and that's very bad for us. Society works at its best when it is a society, and we're being pushed away from each other. And again, the pandemic hasn't helped with that, and the internet, online world hasn't helped with that. We sit in our rooms with our headphones on, or we walk around the world with headphones on looking at our phones, and we just don't look at the world or the people around us. We need more physical, personal, human interaction, and maybe that'll lead somewhere good.
I wonder if there's going to be an increase in books and films and TV shows set in a slightly not pre-digital, but sort of early 2000s sort of time, before smartphones were tracking you, before the internet was quite so pervasive, because it must be easier to write in that time period when, like you said, you don't have to worry about your antagonist getting caught doing the things that they're doing. So we might see an increase in period pieces.
Yeah, I mean, during last year's lockdown I wrote 2 novels, and one was a rebus novel, A Song for the Dark Times, which was set in 2019. It was just slightly pre-pandemic. But the other one was working on finishing a book that had been started by William McIlvanney, great Scottish novelist, and he'd written a novel featuring his detective, Laidlaw, but set in 1972. Well, that was an escape from the pandemic, to write about 1972. I was 12 years old. Book set in Glasgow. I don't think I'd ever visited Glasgow at that time in my life. But yeah, a novel where it's just good old-fashioned goodies and baddies. Mostly blokes. Blokes attacking other blokes because they're in gangs, and male cops trying to stop them. Very simple, very straightforward. No CCTV, no cell phones, no nothing. A working phone box if you're lucky, and sectarian violence on the streets. And pubs that shut in the afternoon and shut at 10 p.m. So you're drinking clubs and stuff like that. It was refreshing to write about that world, but it was hard because it's a historical novel. And on television and in film, that's very expensive to do. To try and recreate a past world, even the recent past, is difficult to do. I had to sort of look up how much would a car cost, how much would a house cost, how much would a pint of beer cost, what were the licensing laws at that time, how did the police operate, did they have anything like the technology they've got now to investigate a crime, or even to do a post-mortem examination. How basic would a post-mortem examination have been? So yeah, but it was good fun. It was good fun to escape the present. And I can see why writers like to do it. I can see why they like to go further back in time to an historical, almost a golden age, when we had absolutes. We were sure that there was good and evil. I mean, Rebus, my character I write about, he's a different generation from me. And I think he has this absolutist view that there's good and evil. And once you've done a bad thing, you're bad forever. And I've got a younger cop called Siobhan Clark, who's basically me telling him, no, there's shades of grey. People can change, they can be rehabilitated, we can forgive them. And Rebus is very much an Old Testament unforgiving guy, I'm afraid.
Have any depictions of utopias or utopian thinking inspired your work?
Or dystopias as well, seeing so obviously that's...
I don't think I've been inspired by utopias. Being a Scottish novelist, I've been much more inspired by the darker side of Scottish literature. Whether it's Miss Jean Brodie, who is both good and evil, or whether it's Jekyll and Hyde, or Confessions of a Justified Sinner, or any number of other great Scottish books, we do like to look at the dark side. We're very interested in the notion that people can contain within them good and evil. And the best fiction has dealt with that. And you find these doppelgangers, these dual personalities littered throughout Scottish literature up to and including Alistair Gray's Lanark, where there are kind of two characters who are the same person, one in the present, one in the future. So utopia is not so much. I mean, Ian Banks was a great friend of mine. We used to go out drinking, and he was very interested in the culture as a possibility, as something that human beings might end up doing in the future, a utopian way of being. Once we go out, he didn't want us to go out into the universe as explorers, taking with us all the crap we've left on this planet, physical and psychological and philosophical crap. So that was a lifelong thing of his, was this notion of the culture, which would be people who have put war to one side and get on and love culture, hence the name. But no, I can't. I find it hard. I find it hard to believe in a world that has no place for the forbidden. You know, when I was very young, I read A Clockwork Orange, which had a huge effect on me. And in that, a really bad young man is made good, in inverted commas, because he's given a series of kind of interventions by the medical and psychological profession that means if he tries to commit violence, he will feel sick. And so he cannot defend himself when people come at him. When his enemies come at him, he can't defend himself. So what they've done is taken away his free will. So in some ways, they've created a utopia, a place where bad people can no longer do bad things. But they've taken away that person's free will in the process, making it, to my mind, a dystopia. So one person's utopia might be my dystopia.
Was it Thomas More that did actually come up with the term utopia to start with, and it means no place or something like that? So even
it's the Greek.
The term is like satire on itself.
I mean, utopia is Greek and it's nowhere, which is why Erewhon was then used as a commentary on that. I've never actually read Utopia. It's about an island and it's supposed to be a lovely place. But again, put me on an island and within a few weeks I'd be kicking off. I don't want your utopia. Give me my utopia, which is sitting in my flat with music, chocolate and books.
That's a really good one. I like that one too.
Maybe we'll be able to do that soon, purely virtually. You know, with VR, you know, you can create a utopian world where everybody's world is different and personalised, but just nobody interacts with each other, which sounds very good.
I guess people have got that now with avatars. They can go online and pretend to be other people, and they can live out their fantasies and desires online without it impacting on people in the real world necessarily. And so there is a utopianism. I think when the internet started, there was definitely a utopian ideal there. There was a philosophy attached to it that said this is free for everybody, it's accessible to everybody, it's democratic, and it took about 10 minutes for it to become lawless and for the dark web to intrude and for pornographers to say, hey, we can make some quick money here, and for all the human frailties and foibles to come out. So it was a utopian ideal for approximately 10 minutes.
I think we're lucky to get 10 minutes, to be honest.
That was when it was in the lab. We've never experienced that.
Yeah, I did miss the early days of dial-up internet, having my W.H. Smith internet that had to plug into the phone and it would sing the wee song.
The song?
Yeah, God, I missed that. So good.
Dial-ups, that noise it made.
Yeah, so good. So we're thinking, in recent years, in the Western world at least, you know, we've seen a big rise in populist politics, and it's dragged everything quite far to the right. Where do you see popular fiction's role in sort of describing this new society?
The crime novel is essentially a political novel. It's a way of looking at society and what's wrong with it and why did this stuff all go wrong. So there is a political dimension to it always. The rise of populism, the rise of the right in Europe is something that was worrying me in 2019 when I started to get the idea for my last book, A Song for the Dark Times. It seemed to me like the world was entering pretty dark times. And you know, there was all this fake news. People didn't know what to believe anymore. Everybody was in their own little bubble. They were being patted on the back by people who believed the same things they did. And there's a line, and I'm forgetting which philosopher it was who said it, when people stop believing in God, they don't believe in nothing, they believe in anything. And so you've got all these snake oil salesmen suddenly came along. One got into the White House. But what you've seen, I mean, the rise of the right specifically, I think is all to do with giving people simple answers to complex questions. People don't want to think too hard about stuff. If you give them a simple answer, it's their fault. It's the immigrants, it's the foreigners, it's this, it's the gypsies, it's the travellers, it's the Roma, it's this, it's that. They go, oh, okay, I don't have to think about that too much. You've answered my question, thank you. And that's terrifying. It's terrifying that people have been led in this direction into a place, philosophically and politically, where we were in the 30s. We were in exactly this place in the 1930s, and we're seeing it all again. We're seeing a polarization. Everything is binary now. You're against us or for us and them. Our one-time friends are now we're told that they're enemies. We can't trust them. We can't do business with them. We can't go and visit them. And I'm afraid the pandemic has played into that, because it has meant that we've become more cowed. We've become led. Our lives have been given over to other people. We've allowed people to make more decisions for us. Free will, we've let our free will disappear. And you know, if anybody tells us, well, the virus came from those people, the virus came from there, don't trust your neighbours, don't trust the people on the street, don't trust the people in the shops, they're going to infect you. We're in a very bad place. I think the culture and civilization are in a very bad place at the moment. So thank goodness that you're talking about utopias, because we need somebody to lighten the mood.
That was our goal.
Yeah,
you know,
we didn't want to talk
good luck.
about anything.
Thanks, yeah.